Good morning, folks. Welcome back to the last day of this project anyway. So good evening to John in the US. And Skip if you're watching. I don't know if you're on there yet. I haven't seen anything. But to everybody else, a good morning. It's a finishing day. So we're going to go through lots of different ideas. Well, my ideas of finishing. Now, it's the most asked question I get is, what finish do you use and how come you've got such a nice finish on your work? Well, today I'll show you how I get there, and the thought that I use on most of my stuff is it's not about the finish. It's about how you prepare for it. So your preparation is the most important. I always say that the last thing that you do with your work is to finish it off. And the first thing that everybody sees when they pick it up is the finish. So this is probably one of the most important parts of the job, is the finish. And the other saying that I usually have, and I used to say this at the shows all the time when we were going to the shows, was the insides has got to be as good as the outside. So all parts of your work needs to be finished very, very well. So let's get into it. We'll go through, what I want to do is I want to show you when I find a new product, or when I get a new product, or I think I need a different finish to something, I'll purchase a product and I'll do some testing. So what I want to do today is I want to go through a testing process and show you how I go about it, so that I get the result that I want, and that tells me whether I want to use that finish or go on to something different. So we're going to do that now. Dave Deambrogio, from who's commonly, you've seen his Instagram feeds or his Facebook feeds. He's the box junkie from Queensland, from Brisbane, I think he is, and he is the or an agent for Constantia organic finishes. Now, apparently they've been going since 1977, and I've never heard of them until Dave called me and said, "Well, have you tried this?" And I thought, well, I'll give it a go. I'm always looking for new stuff, always looking to try different things, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through what I would do with a new product that I'm going to use. Now, on the bench over here, I'll just turn on there for Pammy to get the camera on. You'll see I have a number of different different finishes that I have used, have experimented with, have tried, and often you'll find that, well, most of the ones that I do use now is that one there, the countertop oil and the organic oil. And I'm looking for something that's, when I do it, I'm looking for something that hasn't got a dryers in it. As you can see, there's a Cabot's carbothane there, which is just a gloss lacquer. Now, that's good for some things, but not the sort of finish that I would want on any of my projects. So it's just something I use where it has to have a bit of weathering or something like that. But as you can see, the Beckett's is made in Western Australia. It's a hard wax, and it's quite good for getting a bit of a gloss on things. The old-fashioned cream polish for antiques, that one I think that one comes from around Byron Bay or somewhere like that. I'm not quite sure. I'd have to look it up again. It's been a while since I've used that one there. I bought that in Ballina, and then you've got Brights, of course, which is a product that's well known throughout the industry, and Pete's Polish. Now, Pete's Polish is a wax that I use all the time now. I find it a very good one. It's just a simple, easy, Carnauba wax, beeswax and gum turpentine mixture. It's made up in Queensland, and it's a very, very good one. Organ oil, it's been on the market for quite some time. I use that quite a lot. The tin is the wax, the tall tin at the back is a Danish oil, which is what we use first up. But the little bottles, that's the wood oil, the red oil and the wax of that Constantia organic finishes. They're the little sample bottles that that the box junkie sent to me. So Dave's done the right thing and he sent me some little bits, and I'm sure if you have a chat to him, he'll help you out. Let him know that you've seen some results of it on my show. So anyway, have a look, and here we go. I'll just go on to the processes that I use for testing. Now, a piece of material that I'm going to use is a piece of softwood, because sometimes we use, all I'm using it most of the time is quite softer timbers. So I'm going to start with this softer timbers. It soaks up the material really quickly, and it'll give us a result fairly quickly. You can see in the grain has lots of different colours in it, so things are going to be highlighted, and we'll see how well it does with that. So the first thing I've done with the piece of timber is I've run it through my drum sander. It's been sanded to 240 grit. Now, I said to you right early in the piece, preparation is the key to getting a good finish. When you look at these boxes that I made just recently, well actually not recent, they're towards the end of the year, the end of last year, you can see the sheen on these boxes. The different timbers will give you different results. And this is why I'm using a piece of timber that has some different colours and things in it. You can see this timber is softer than that timber. You can see the silver ash actually has a different effect than the rose mahogany in the top of this box here. And the red banksia, which is a softer timber, you can see that it's actually soaked up a lot of that material, and it looks like it's hungry. It looks like it needs another feed. So it's a little bit flatter than the rest of it. You can see the variation between that and that. So different timbers will give you different results. So the idea is to make sure that when you're doing your testing, test with a number of different different timbers. But for today's exercise, we're just going to use the one piece, and this is how I'll go about it. So what I've done here is I've marked off this section here. Now that section is going to be 240. I'll have another piece because I've got red oil and the normal wood oil to do. So it's going to be two pieces at 240 grit. So if I just square a line across here, I could use a texter, but I'll use a pencil anyway. And then I'm going to mask that off. And in your processing here, you're actually working through using different sanding techniques as well. So that's also a good point. Now I'm going to sand all of that with 320. That's 240, 320. So I'll just get my gear here. Just watch your legs there, Pammy. So I'm using my MIRKA system. You can use just ordinary sandpaper and sand it by hand, but this is a little quicker. So 320. And people ask me, how long do you sand for? You sand until you think you got the job done properly. So sand the whole lot. So now I have a 320 grit sandpaper section. Do that again. It just gives me 2 sections. I just want enough there so that I can actually see the result of the finish. And I'll mask that off as well. Okay, I'm going to drop my grade again. So a little piece of 400. Have another start. Mask that piece off. Some people would say, what a lot of trouble to go through to work out what your finish is. But remember, the comment that I said earlier was that the last thing you do on your work is put a finish on. The first thing that everybody sees is that finish. So the idea is to get it right. Now what I've done is I've actually sanded off the sandpaper marks from each of the coarser sections as we go through the thing here. So now I'm down to 600. Okay, so now I need just to apply some finishes. So I'm just going to divide that into 2. Mask off the first one. Shift this so I can put my tray up. I just want something to protect the bench with. Okay, so now I'm going to apply some finishes. Thank you, Pammy. So the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to do a red oil. I don't need that one just yet. Just going to apply some red oil. As you can see, it's very red. At this stage, I'm not quite sure what's in it and what causes the red yet. I still have to read the fact sheets, but I'm going to test this stuff out and see how it goes. So I've got 2 little brushes. As you can see, look how red that is. So just put a little bit on. Now, because it's a natural oil, it's going to have to sit for a little bit to soak in. You can see, I'll take this off. You can see the difference already. Look at that. Let's go. Oh, I need that piece of tape. Now the natural oil. As you can see, that's quite different. Two different brushes, so I'm not going to contaminate each of them. You can see there's a difference there already. Now remember, this is 600 grit sanding. So what I'm saying to you is that you need to sand your work properly. Look at the difference. Significant difference. The red oil, excuse me, have a little drink here. The red oil is actually lifted the colours and made them stand out a little bit. So let's go on to the 400 grit and see what we get out of that. So my red oil, it's my first of my 400s. You can already see, well I can anyway, I don't know if you can see it on film, on the camera, but I can already see that it's not going to be as nice as the 600, even though it's done exactly the same thing and lifted the colour on the piece of timber. Very dull. That's just with 400. Let's go to the 320 and see what that does. So root oil first. Pretty much the same as the 400 with the 320. And then we have, of course, the wood oil. Any questions there, Pammy? No. Must be enthralled. Where's my pencil? So this is 600. This is 400. This is 360. And now the 240. I get people who often come to me and say, how do you get such a nice finish on your work? And when I explain that I sand right through the grades, the answer I often that comes back to me, I know you people wouldn't do that, wouldn't say this, but the answer that often comes back, oh, I don't sand that much. I haven't got the time to do that. Well, the secret is patience. Have some patience with your work and take the time to prepare your work, prepare your surfaces before you actually put the finishes on. So if you're painting your car, you wouldn't just get a file and file off the plastic filler if you put it in there and then paint straight over the top of that. You'd have to sand it down, put an undercoat on, and you go through a process of actually preparing it. So what I have now is I have that oil sitting on there. I'll just put it down there. So I'm going to let that settle and soak in for a little bit. You can see where I've put the 600 on. It's quite wet. If you have a look up at the 240 end, you can see it's actually soaked in and dried up already, and it's not a very nice finish. So as you can see, the value of sanding correctly will give you a far better job. And we'll see when I wipe all that material off. So we'll have a look at that. Now, in the meantime, while that's settling, so I'm going to let it sit for a bit. I'm going to use the current products that I'm using for the boxes, and I'm going to show you what I've done with the other stuff there. So I'll just get that out of the way. I'll sit this one aside. It can sit over there. And we'll come back to that when it's settled in. So I generally leave the finishes sit for 15-20 minutes once I put the oils on, and allow it to soak into the timber. If you don't let it soak into the timber, then it looks a little bit dry and hungry after a little while. So it's a good idea to just let it soak in, fill up the pores, and go from there. Okay, now where we're up to with the boxes. So what I've done so far, and I'm going to do this afterwards, is this was the first of the boxes. This was the one that had that's a little bit narrower than all the others, and you can see a combination of silver ash and ebony on the front of the box. It's the one I made the little inserts for last week. You can see that it's all done. So what I've done is I've just sanded everything and put a coat of finish on it, and I've gone through the sanding process by doing everything right down to fine grades. Now, I can't use the MIRKA on the smaller sections of the box. I can't use the MIRKA on here because it's just too small, and anyway, you end up rounding over things because you don't get them right, and you want each of the panels to be nice. So what I've done, and one of these days I will make a proper box, but all I've done is torn up all my sandpapers, and got myself a little list of different sandpaper that I use all the time, and it rates for 100 grit for where I want to tear something off quickly. So for argument's sake, if I want to take the end off a dovetail or something, I'm using 100 grit, right down to 2000 grit. Now I'm going to use some of the 2000 grit today, and that's about all I'll go to at this stage. I do have another set of sandpapers that go to much finer grades, but it's there for really later on. So what I want to do today is I want to show you how I got to this stage by using one of my other boxes. And this one here, I've sanded everything except the bottom 3 drawers. I've still got to do those 3 drawers. So I'll take those out and get them out of the way. I'll take them all out actually, and I'll just do the cabinet itself. I think just doing the cabinet should be sufficient, and then we'll go back to our tester and see how we look there. And then I've got some other boxes. As you can see, when you look at the finish, everything is sanded perfectly smooth. So I've sanded down I've actually sanded down to 1000 grit with all of these, because I want to start with a very, very fine grade, and at least give it a nice finish on the top. So the inside of the box was done before I assembled it, so that's all done inside there, and my fingers are actually, my hands are quite thick. They don't actually fit into the box there. I have to get Pammy to get in there and give it a bit of a wipe. Her fingers are much smaller than mine, but I'll take that out of the way. And putting a finish on. Now, the finish that I'm going to use on this one is the Kunos countertop oil. So just find a stirring stick. Doesn't normally come in little tins like this, but decanting it into these smaller tins means that we don't waste so much, because it does tend to, the countertop oil has a little bit of hardener in it, so it does go off a little bit, but not that much that it's going to affect the finish. It still has that oily look. The oil generally comes in the bottle that you saw on the counter there earlier, and occasionally it gets a skin on the top of it, so putting it into little containers like this actually does stop that skin from forming, and I'm not leaving so much exposed to the air. Okay. You can see that this is going to look really nice once I get it on there. So, brush. So all I'm going to do is going to brush it on. I've done all my sanding. Like I said to you earlier, I've sanded 1,000. And you can see it's going to soak in really, really nicely. Put plenty on. It's not going to hurt it. Into the back of it. So,
Col, when you're building components and using the jig,
yes.
What grade do you sand down the components before you cut the dovetails?
Is that a question on there?
That's the question.
Okay. Who's asked the question?
Michael.
Michael?
Just answer the question.
Michael, when I'm making projects, I generally match my finish to the type of project that I'm doing. So if I'm doing something that's a little bit agricultural, you might say, what I will do is I'll sand to 240, and that'll be all I need to do, and then I'll finish off sanding afterwards. Whereas on something that's really delicate, something that is tight, where it has a tight space, where I can't get into at all, I will sand to 1,000 or 1,200 before I actually cut any joints. So predominantly it's the style of work that I'm doing that actually dictates what grade I sand to. So if it's something that's not going to matter too much about the finish, well then I'll do a rough finish. But I always sand it, always prepare my timber properly before I actually do anything. Making sure that everything is square, everything is smooth, and everything is nice and even. The sanding is not the result, or not going to give you a perfect result if you haven't cut it square. Sanding will look nice, but you want the perfect result from actually having square timber. Okay, so as you can see, there's a huge difference between what we had earlier. You can see that is now fully coated all the way over. Now, just put that aside for a sec. Just let that sit there for a bit. So I just want to let it set and soak in. If you don't let it soak in, you're not going to get a good result because it's not going to set for you. So now, you can see on the top of that, it's already soaked in and it's starting to go dry. And it's just along that front edge there. Cedar is notorious for this. It tends to sort of soak up everything. As soon as you put it on there, you can see that it's soaked up. So just go over it again. Just make sure I've got plenty in there. As soon as you put a finish on, you can see the end grain of everything pops up as well. You can see how it shows up. Even where I've engraved it on the back there, it's got end grain showing inside all the little grooves where I've put my name in that. And that's even shown up really nicely as well. So yeah, it looks good.
Paris says it looks fantastic, and it does too. It really brings the timber to life.
It does that. As Pammy was saying, it just brings the timber to light. It shows up everything, looks good, and as soon as I've got it finished off, I'm not a big fan of shiny. I like to have a natural sort of a finish. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you what happens after that is set, right? This box here, this is the one I showed you just earlier. And I'm going to do this one with a machine. So I'll take all my trays out. This is the next step that I will go to. So what's happened here is I've put a finish on everything, and I've added a little baize bottom on it, right? Just to make it that little bit nicer, so it'll sit on the bench quite nice. So all I'm going to do is work on the outside of it, and you'll see, if you look at it now, you can see that it's not real shiny. It's got a relatively dull finish. So what I want to do is I want to lift the finish a little bit more. Okay, so we're going to do a process that a lot of people sort of frown on. I find it a really good process, and that's called wet sanding. Now, when I wet sand, what we're doing is we're actually, let's get a piece of 2000 grit here. What I'm doing is, when your surface gets wet, what happens is the grain rises, right? Now, what I could do is I could get some water before I actually put the finish on, give it a sand with water to raise the grain, and then re-sand it before I put the finish on. But you're still going to get the same result to a certain extent because you're folding over the particles. But we're not, so I'm basically just skipping one of the processes. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to put the finish on here. Okay, so this is basically my second and third coat. While it's wet, I'm going to give it a sand. Okay, so now my piece of sandpaper here is a piece of 2000 grit. Okay, so it's just 2000 grit wet and dry sandpaper. And now with my fingers flat, I'm just sanding. Now I could do this with the first coat, but I don't. I want the first coat to soak in. With this one here, what I'm doing is I'm just working the finish into the existing finish. And the other thing that's happening here is while I'm doing that, I'm actually creating a slurry. Now that slurry is going to fill up any other abnormalities that might have occurred while we were doing our sanding process. Okay.
It's also nourishing the timber too, isn't it?
Yeah, as Pam was saying, nourishing the timber, giving it a bit of life, putting stuff back into the pores of the timber. And you can see my last work through the timber is with the grain. and then a piece of clean cloth. You can actually see the difference already. It's actually got a sheen on it now. It's not shiny, but it's got a sheen. You can see it. Yeah, it's looking really, really nicely. I'll let that sit for a little bit and then some wax. But what I want to do is I want to show you another method that I use. So I give it a coat. Okay. This little tool, my little 325, I haven't got it attached to the dust extractor because it's going to suck up whatever's on there, and I don't want that to go into the dust extractor. But I've got on it a 2000 grit Abranet sponge pad. Okay, so a little spongy pad, and it's flexible, so very light pressure. If you don't have the time to do it by hand, or you don't have the equipment, maybe you have this equipment. This will give you the same result. That depends on the timber again, tree cycle. If I'm using a soft timber, it's a longer time than if I'm using a hardwood. Hardwoods tend to soak up less because of the grain structure, and so I tend to sort of leave them a little bit less time than a softwood. A softwood takes its time, it'll soak it all up, and basically with the hardwoods you wipe it on and let it sit for 10 or 15 minutes and then wipe it off, and then wet sand it straight after that. So this box that I've got, this other box that I've got over here, it's been sitting there for the 5 minutes now, so I'll give it another few minutes and then I'll wipe the excess off. In the meantime, yes, this is countertop oil. You can use this method with any oil you like. It's more the process that we're talking about here. The product is something, as I said earlier with the testing, is something you test and you figure out whether you like it or not. Sometimes you'll find that a finish will give you far, far shinier than you really want, or it'll make it really dull, or it'll have an effect on it that's really not pleasant to look at, or something that just doesn't suit the work you're doing. So the idea is to sort of work around. Experimenting with finishes is one of the things that actually a lot of people avoid, and it should be part of what you do. Have a look at different finishes. Okay, it might cost you a couple of bob, but have a look at the different finishes and see what sort of effect you get. You'll find eventually you'll get to the stage where you have a finish that you like, and this is my case here now. Is I've found this Kunos countertop oil actually suits cedar really nicely. I probably wouldn't use it on well, you don't use it on the inside of anything, but on the outside of all these little boxes, it's perfect. But that's only through testing.
Ozzy wants to know where you get the little pads. It's on the MIRKA, this little handheld one.
Japanese tools have those little pads. You can get them in a number of different grades. That one just happens to be 2000 because I want a really fine fit. There's a link to Japanese tools down below, so if you want to have a look there. There's also a link to Dave Deambrogio, so if you want to get in touch with Dave, jump on the link.
Actually, it's Japanese tools, other branch, it's Best Abrasives.
Yes. Now I can't use this machine on here because it'll round over all the bits and pieces that I've got squared up. So this is where we go to the sandpaper. Put some oil on there and just give that a light sand. Do the same down here. So finishing it's the hardest job of all. It takes the most time. As a lot of people find, it is tedious. But if you prepare earlier, like all of this, all of these parts were sanded well before I actually started working with them, and it's made it a lot easier to get to the finish stage. So we're looking really, really nice now. Okay, so I'll let that sit for a little bit. I'm going to wax this today because I want to show you, because it's the last day, I want to show you actually what the process is. You'll just have to take my word for the timing. But I'm going to wax that in a second. So I'll just put it aside out of the way. What I want to do is I want to wipe the finish off this one here before it dries on me. You don't want it to go too sticky. You can see how nice that's looking now. The thing is that when you get to this stage, you can actually see if there's any faults that you need to rectify, and you've only got one coat of finish that you've done on it, so it's coming up beautifully. It's a very nice little box, this one. Somebody said to me the other day when they saw it, you got a gap down the sides. Well, that's, of course I've got a gap. I want the thing to expand and contract without pushing the box apart. So that was the idea behind having that, just that tiny little bit. I can get my hand in that one. And that one. And now it's just a matter of going through and doing all the drawers as well. Can't reach into the bottom of that. Have to fix that later. So that's a coat of finish on just the first coat. Okay, now I've got 15 minutes left, so what I'm going to do is I've got to have a look at the tester. So we're going to have a look at that, and the other thing I want to do is show you how I wax the box. So I'll let that set for a little bit longer, and I'll set this one aside. I'll bring in my tester. So here's my tester. So before I even start looking at it, you can see. Okay, can't see that?
It's
really difficult. Oh, okay. You can see, as you look up the piece of timber, you can see that this is the 600. It's still wet. Now put the same amount of finish on. It's still wet, but not as wet with the 400. This is dried out and soaked up and gone all lumpy, and so is the 240. So that indicates to me that you need to make sure that your sanding process is exceptionally good. So let's just wipe off the excess. Quite dull. Interesting. Soaked in for 10 minutes and it's still relatively wet. And when I look at the results, I can see it. I don't know if you can see it on the screen, but where I've had the red, it's much redder. All of the colours are actually brighter. Can't quite see it. These two here, there is a little bit of difference in the top edge there. This one here, there's significant difference. Same with the 320 and the 240. The sheen on all of them is a little dull, except for the 600. The 600 stands out far above everything else. So that indicates to me that you need to make sure that your sanding is correct. You saw me sand from here to here with 320, from here to here with 400, from here to here with 600, and I can see quite a difference of finish just from one coat setting. Now all I need to do is find a box to put it on. So I might put it on one of my other boxes, and I'll show you in a later show what result we get from this finish. So I'm quite pleased about the result from the 600. So I'll put that aside and then I'll wax up the other box. So when you're testing, this one here I've used a piece of camphor. When you're testing, test with lots of different timbers. Okay, so I'm only using a piece of camphor here. The next one's going to be, I'll do a bit of a test on some cedar. I'll do a test on maybe a bit of coachwood or something like that, a bit of silver ash. We'll give it a little bit of test on a number of different timbers and see what the results are. But as you can see, just on that soft timber, we've got quite a good result. So I can see the differences between all of those. So I'll put this away and I'll get the wax out and I'll wax up the top of that other little box. It's been sitting for a few minutes. Get rid of that one. Now when I'm waxing, I've done the same thing. I've tested all my waxes, and you saw all the waxes on the bench there earlier. I was using the organ oil wax for a number of the jobs, and I found that it tends to go flat quicker than the others, and therefore it needs rejuvenating regularly. So what I've come up with, or what I've found, is a product called Pete's Polish. Now it's turn it around so you can see it. So Pete's Polish, quite a good polish, and this is how I apply it. I have a number of different tools that I use to apply this stuff. You can see it's not a complete hard wax, but so put a bit on a rag and just rub it in. Don't need a lot. It's got a great smell. Okay, now back to my little MIRKA. What I have on my MIRKA here is I've got a little sponge pad. Okay, so that little sponge pad is what I use sort of rub that stuff in. Normally I would leave that to settle for a day or two before I actually put the wax on. This process I'm going to do it quickly. And then I have another little MIRKA, a little 12. And this this one I have a little polishing pad on. And so give it a little polish like so. So when you look at the result on that, you can see that it's quite a natural looking finish. I'll let that sit for another day, and then I'll give it another polish up with my little pad. And you can see it's actually perfectly flat now. It looks really, really nice, and you can see there's a bit of a sheen on it. It's not highly shiny, but it's got a little bit of a sheen on it, and then once it settles, we'll end up with a really nice finish, similar to the boxes that I showed you earlier. So that will give you at least a good result. One of the problems you get, and I'm going to get another box out and show you in a minute, when if you're using wax, natural waxes and finishes, is that eventually they sort of dissipate and disappear, and they become, the box or the product looks a little bit hungry, it needs a drink or something like that. And I'll show you a result of that. I've got now this is a box that I made in 2018. The timber in it, Jarrah, silky oak and blackheart sassafras, and as you can see it's gone quite flat. It looks like it needs a drink of something or other. Now the finish that I've used on this one was the organ oil, and it sort of just dried out, and it hasn't been in out in the sun or anything like that, but it actually needs a drink. So just a little bit of work, you can bring that back to looking quite nice, just with a little bit of wax. So if I just put a bit of wax on it, you can actually see the colour in the blackheart is actually starting to stand out already just by putting the wax on there. See the difference already? It's just popped it up and just rejuvenated the top of the box just by doing that. Get my little MIRKA out, give it a polish. Polish. And there you can see it's brought the life of the box back. just by adding a little bit of wax and a little bit of elbow grease. And the thing about waxes and natural finishes and things like that, you probably have to do that every now and then. You need to do that to the box just to make it look that little bit nicer. So as you can see, pretty back to normal, back to where it was before. So quite a nice setup, and so that's how I get my finishes and how I get my boxes done. So the important things to remember with it: sand through the grades, make sure that you get starting at the coarse grade to get it perfectly smooth, and then before you actually cut any joints, particularly with delicate boxes, sand down to 600, at least 600, and that way it's not so much hard work in the inside of the boxes later on down the track. And it should be easy enough to get a good finish. Make sure your preparation is perfect. And then, like I say, do some testing. Make sure that you experiment with your finishes and work at them. Like I say, it's the last thing that you do to the box. It's the first thing that everybody sees when they pick the box up. So at least have a go at different finishes. We do have links to a couple of places where you can buy your finishes. CARROLL'S has a number of different types of finishes. Like I say, Dave Deambrogio, or the Box Junkie, has he's an agent for the new one that I've just showed a little demo on, and yeah, so you can get the cabinets, I think, from any hardware store. So there's lots of stuff like that around. Just be careful of some of the finishes. Make sure you've got plenty of ventilation around when you're using them, particularly if you're using something with a hardener in it. And yeah, enjoy your finishing. Take your time and you'll get a really, really nice job. So that's it for today. Now what we're going to do, we're going to take a week off so I can set up my next project. So next week we'll be won't be on, but the week after we will be, and I'll come back with another, hopefully, really interesting sort of a project. So if you enjoyed what you saw today, please subscribe, click the button, and we'll let you know when we're back on the air. So have a good week, everybody, or hey, good 2 weeks, everybody, and I will see you all later.